Hey there, adventure. I'm Norwolf. Welcome to my role-playing game realm. So I feel like I'm past due in putting out an update for my wilderness exploration rules that I'm working on for Against Darkness. So to that end, I want to provide you a quick look at where I am with the rules. As mentioned before, or in the previous video, I'm leaning heavily to start, anyways, on publications like the Wilderness Exploring from Doug Peterson, Overland Adventures from Lowell Foster, Journey into Unknown Lands by Jean-Philippe Millet, Tantalizing Trails of Turmoil and Treasure by Can at BGG or Board Game Geeks, Wilderness for more sandbox approach, guidelines for a more sandbox approach for Four Against Darkness by Hike. Sorry if I've mispronunciated that, but anyways. Like I said, they're all a starting point for the what I'm putting together in kind of my own little compendium of overland adventure information. And so let's dive right into that and see where I'm at. So I've basically got a current PDF here. Table of contents. Of course, I'm going to cover off the acknowledgements at the beginning. How my look at starting the wilderness exploring. There are some different options of how to get into it. I guess one of the main changes that I'm looking for, or the difference that I'm looking for in how I'm doing exploration, or I guess a different feel, is that I want the X's to be beyond kind of the known civilized starting point for the most part. I want the hexes to be kind of untamed wilderness or unexplored wilderness. So you're not very likely to come across, or you're almost not likely at all to come across like civilized towns or other settlements. You're not going to come across, stray monasteries or taverns or other things like that out in the wilderness. You kind of have to go from kind of known starting points for the most part, as I said, to exploring out. I have put an option in there for starting from, where you exit a dungeon, and, or just randomly starting on a hex. But in those instances, I think you still want to have a hex relatively close, or have found, or randomly determine a hex relatively close. That is your starting settlement, and then going from there into the wilds. So if you do happen to come across a town out in the wilderness, it's going to be more than likely a forgotten outpost or some forgotten settlement that's run by some nefarious power, and essentially gets treated more like a dungeon-like experience, at least to start, until you've kind of cleared it out. Maybe you've re-civilized it or something, whatever the word is that you want to use for it. You brought it under maybe even it's your own character's control, and they become the leaders of that wilderness town and establish trade routes with the kind of the other known settlements and things like that. But anyways, maybe it's another aspect of gameplay that I hadn't really even considered until I just mentioned it now. So anyways, yeah, so let's quickly just do a flip through here. So, as I said, acknowledging some of the different references that I'm using, I'll put links to all these in the notes down below, or somebody would say the doobly-doo. And in the last video, I was saying I couldn't find a link to the Crypts of Damnation, but I actually did, so that'll be down in the links below as well. And yeah, so anyways, where to start? So looking at exiting a dungeon and starting in the wilderness from there. Looking at starting settlements and going from that point forward, or pick a hex on the middle of nowhere and start in Lost in the Wilderness. Although, as I mentioned earlier, I think a bit of a revision to this that I'm going to make is that you're going to pick a random hex out there somewhere that has a known um, settlement that you can head towards. Otherwise, I think it's going to be a bit of a slog without any settlements. Yeah, and then the overland exploration procedure. I'm in the process of kind of fleshing some of this out. We get into logistics. What happens at the start of the day? Start of the day, I need to still do some work around the food, camping. I like the idea of being able to buy a camping set or something like that your characters take with you and establish a campsite out in the wilderness somewhere. How resting and health or restoring your health when you're out in the wilderness will actually work. I think I can't remember which supplement it was that basically resting for the night will give you half a point back. Probably do something like that unless you've established a formal camp, and maybe at that point it's 1 point a night. Again, resting in the wilderness, you're probably not regaining spells and things like that potentially. So I still have to kind of work through some of the rules for this. What flavor I want for this kind of gritty wilderness exploration. How hunting is going to work. So basically you're not traveling that day. You're hunting for game or um, other food sources in the wild. And then getting into the movement. So basically assuming that with the hex system that I'm using, a standard grassland or farmland hex will basically take a day to traverse. And then going into, if you're going through forest hex on foot, how long is that going to take? If you're following a road, how much easier is that to traverse the hex? If you're in the hills, you know, again, whether you're on foot or mounted, I'm assuming if you're flying, you're going to be going through multiple hexes a day, and that's no longer as much of a concern about whether you're going through over top of swamps, mountains, or whatever. I'm not going to get into the whole flying aspect at this point in time. Weather, I've kind of taken some of the inspiration from various tables and come up with my own weather system, rolling 2d6 twice. So you're going to roll for, what's the weather that day, likely going to be either, no precipitation, light clouds, or you're getting into some sort of precipitation, or on the rare occasions, heavy precipitation or some sort of a special weather event, and then getting into the special weather table. These I still want to modify a bit. They are from a combination of Tantalizing Trails and Overland Adventures. They, again, so tuning this a bit more to kind of look at what I'm interested in. I've changed the spread fairly significantly, so either it's contained to that same hex or maybe one hex outside of the one that you're in. The terrain types, looking at again whether you're staying in the same type of terrain when you move to a new hex, or whether you're rolling for new hex type or new hex terrain type, and then how that. There's some notes here about how it affects your movement, but that'll probably get replaced with the earlier table up here with traveling across a hex. So we'll see what sort of information I end up putting in the notes column here. Roads and rivers, again, I've taken inspiration from both Tantalizing Trails and Overland Adventures and modified it a bit. I don't want a proliferation of roads across across the hex maps, so I'm looking to probably limit the number of roads or how many roads are appearing, and limiting 3 roads connecting and not anymore. And then similar with rivers, basically they're, as was mentioned before, or in the other books, the rivers are basically following the road rules for splitting or connecting, or whether there's a river that's starting. And any new road that starts will start at some sort of a will not necessarily start at some sort of a dungeon or something like that, or a feature. It could be just a stray road in the middle of nowhere that from some past civilization. And then we get into the various events. Started doing some modifications here. The one change is that you're rolling for a wandering monster. It's not an automatic surprise. If I remember correctly, that was one of the things in one of the supplements. And the events are, or at least these events anyways, are for the most part either running into monsters, a small likelihood of an NPC of some sort. Again, the NPCs would be what you would potentially find out in the untamed wilds or untamed wilderness. So again, not likely that you've got a merchant caravan or something that's passing through a hex where there's no reason for them to be there. I may shift that a little bit. Say that, if it's within one hex of a civilized road between known settlements, or within one hex of a settlement, then I may be altering kind of the monster events or the hex events here a bit. The moment the Wandering monster tables are essentially taken directly out of the Tantalizing Trails. Do want to kind of review these and potentially expand them a bit more. I might look at some of the other supplements and look to make these maybe a D10 or D12 type table for, whether it's a basic party or an expert party. And these are going to be based on the tiers. Let's see. And then gets into the descriptions of each of the monsters. I'm looking at modifying these descriptions a bit. I want to playtest it a bit and understand whether the highest character level +3 makes sense, or or lowest character level makes sense, things like that. And what else here? Looking at coming up with a common or a custom vermin monster table, custom minion monster tables, and then there's the NPC encounters. These I am again going to be modifying. It's not likely that you're going to be finding a horse trader out in the middle of nowhere. Very likely you could find some hunters from some tribes or something that are out in the middle of nowhere. Definitely an orc patrol. Don't remember what number 7 was, but again, I'm looking to replace that. Demonic ritual site makes sense to me. These travelers, this is going to be modified, of course. Hunter camp, very likely, again, I'll probably put some constraints around this to say, as long as it's within maybe 2 hexes of a known settlement or something like that. Farmers in the field, again, this would have to be within 1 hex of a road between settlements or the settlement itself. So again, the descriptions for a lot of these need to be updated or reviewed. And I'm still looking for inspiration for the encounters from the Tales of Adventures Guild, the original 4AD book itself, or Warlock Woes, Mountains, War Mountains of Mayhem, Crucible Classic Critters. Need to find a good source for Swamp and Desert. I know there's a planned publication for 4 Against Darkness for the Swamp. I think there's a third-party publication for Desert, so I'll look at those. And then, of course, Aquatic, looking at Darkwater. Special features, I think I mentioned in the previous video that, again, Crypts, looking at Crypts of Damnation, a Cursed Town, possibly Ravagers of Ruins, or Cursed Decrepit Town. Wilderness Town, this is again a town out in the middle of nowhere that's got some nefarious ruler that's running it. Looking at lantern number 2 for that. And yeah, so again, I won't get into the details around this much at this point. There's the hex map template that I'll be using, and these are all numbered so that on the following pages you can put in your hex number, a description of what's in that hex. And yeah, and then we just get into an appendix that has all the acronyms for the different books and other acronyms like HCL and LCL. And then I also have one last appendix here for miscellaneous information. So talking about tier numbers. So basic, expert, heroic, legendary, epic, depending on character levels, and what modifier that could apply to encounters or other things like that. Anyways, yeah, so that is the so where I've gotten to so far for my Tome of Overland Adventures, which is, like I said, a compilation of some of the various rules that I've been looking at here. Tantalizing trails, guidelines for a more sandbox approach to Four Gates Darkness, journeys into unknown lands, wilderness exploring, overland adventures, the lantern, and tales from the Adventurers Guild. Other things that I'm still considering, or unanswered questions or future considerations that I'm looking at. So how I want to deal with a calendar system. So I think if I'm, tracking how long the adventuring group is out there, I think a calendar system of some sort would be kind of handy. I want to keep it fairly basic, maybe 12 months, 30 days a month, and kind of leave it at that. We'll see what I do with that anyways. Another item that I'm looking at is how to conveniently track where each character is in the timelines, particularly when you're dealing with troop play or guilds. So, you may have in troop play, I think you have 12 characters, so 3 groups of 4, or maybe some characters even splitting out and going on solo. And again, they have some solo information in, I think it was Adventurers Guild here. So it could be that your characters start getting out of sync in the calendar. So, how do you keep track of where they are on the calendar? And maybe that becomes more clear when I pick a calendar actually. If I'm tracking days, do I want birthdays for all the characters? So the simple answer there is I'll probably likely give each of my characters a birthday and kind of randomly roll that on the calendar and keep track of how old they are. So, maybe they'll be starting at, I don't know, I'll start at age, 16 to 18 or 16 to 22 or something like that. So, we'll see where that goes. And then kind of a future consideration is domains and strongholds. I mentioned that previously. But, at some point they're going to have money they want to do something with. So, do they start setting up their own stronghold somewhere? Or, if they've freed a town from some nefarious villain out there and they want to take over and run that town and start building trade routes with some of the existing known settlements, how does maybe that comes into play here. And then with that calendar system, an ability to log various events, world events, or making it a little bit more of a living world sort of scenario here. Getting into more of a, a little bit more of a role-playing game rather than just a dungeon crawling game. So anyways, that's coming down the pipe at some point. I want to kind of get to a good point with the Tome of Overland Adventures that I'm putting together. I'll be sharing, more of this as I get through it. But again, speaking of sharing, I've had a few requests for my character sheets. So I will, in the notes down below, I've put a link to a OneDrive where I'm sharing various things, including my earlier Powers and Perils stuff. And I've thrown some of these 4AD character sheets in there. So I've got 3 different versions of the character sheet document. I've got this one, which is the basically half-page size pages, which you can print for 2 to a page in Adobe Acrobat or whatever application you're using. Or I've got just a double-sided print that you can do with the notes on the backside. And there's 2 pages here, so when you print double-sided, you'll end up with 2 character pages and with the notes on the back of each, if you cut them down the middle. And then the other option I've put here is just a single page that has the 2 character sheets, 2 up on a page. And again, you can print it off and do whatever you want with it. So anyways, yeah, so anyways, that's my current update. I hope to get a little bit more for Four Against Darkness out over the next few weeks, as well as hopefully getting back to my Powers and Perils solo play. So anyways, as usual, please like, subscribe. I'm looking forward to seeing any comments or suggestions that you guys might have. And we will see you next time.